The morning sun was just breaking through the clouds when David pulled his rental car into the massive parking lot of Prestige Auto Gallery. He'd been traveling for nearly 6 hours, catching an early flight from Chicago to finalize the biggest business deal of his life. At 42 years old, he'd spent the last 2 decades building his investment company from the ground up, and today marked a new chapter. This luxury car dealership was now his, though nobody here knew it yet. David had deliberately kept the acquisition quiet. The official announcement wasn't scheduled until Monday morning, 3 days away. He wanted this weekend to walk through his new business unnoticed, to see how things really worked when the boss wasn't watching. It was something he'd learned years ago from his mentor. You learn more about a company in an hour of anonymous observation than in a month of scheduled meetings. He'd dressed simply for the flight. Comfortable jeans, a navy blue polo shirt, and his favorite sneakers. After spending the morning in airports and rental car lines, he just wanted to stretch his legs and get a feel for the place. The dealership looked impressive from the outside. Glass windows stretched 2 stories high, and through them he could see rows of luxury vehicles that gleamed under the showroom lights. Cars that cost more than most people's houses. Walking through the main entrance, David felt a small thrill of pride. This was his now. Well, it would be officially his on Monday. But the paperwork was signed, the money transferred. He'd worked so hard for this moment. The showroom was even more impressive inside. The floors were polished to a mirror shine, and soft classical music played in the background. Salespeople in sharp suits moved between customers, their voices low and professional. Everything looked perfect on the surface. David started walking slowly through the aisles of cars, taking mental notes. He watched how the sales staff interacted with customers, how quickly they approached people, what kind of questions they asked. A young couple was test driving a sports car, the salesman enthusiastic and patient. An older gentleman was being shown the features of a luxury sedan, complete with offers of coffee and comfortable seating. The operation seemed smooth and professional, but as David continued walking, something started to bother him. He'd been in the showroom for almost 15 minutes now, and not a single person had approached him. Not even a simple hello or a nod of acknowledgement. He watched a well-dressed woman walk in, and within seconds 2 salespeople were at her side, smiling and welcoming. A man in an expensive suit entered right after, and he too was greeted immediately with offers of assistance. David stopped in front of a stunning silver sedan, one of the top models on the floor. The price tag showed $95,000. He bent down to look at the interior, genuinely curious about the features. He ran his hand along the smooth paint, admiring the craftsmanship. This was exactly the kind of inventory he was excited about selling. That's when he heard the voice behind him. Sharp, with an edge that made it clear this wasn't a friendly greeting. "Can I help you with something?" David turned to see a man in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a supervisor badge on his perfectly pressed suit. His arms were crossed and his expression was anything but welcoming. There was no smile, no warmth in his eyes, just suspicion. "Yes, actually," David said, keeping his voice friendly. "I'm interested in learning more about your inventory here. Beautiful cars." The supervisor's eyes traveled slowly from David's sneakers up to his face, taking in every detail of his casual outfit. The look on his face made David's stomach tighten. He'd seen that expression before too many times in his life. It was the look of someone who'd already made up their mind about you before you'd even spoken. "These vehicles start at $90,000, the supervisor said slowly, as if David might not understand. "We have a sister location about 20 minutes from here that carries more affordable options. Might be more what you're looking for." The words hung in the air between them. Other customers nearby had started to notice the interaction. A salesman paused mid-conversation with his client, glancing over. David felt the familiar burn of anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He'd dealt with this kind of treatment his entire life, even as he'd climbed higher and higher in the business world. Money in the bank didn't change the color of his skin, and apparently, it didn't change how some people saw him. "I appreciate the suggestion," David said evenly, "but I'm quite comfortable with these price points. I'd like to discuss your premium inventory." The supervisor's jaw tightened. He uncrossed his arms and took a step closer, his voice dropping lower but somehow becoming more aggressive. "Look, I don't know what you're trying to do here, but we get people coming in all the time just to look at cars they have no intention of buying. Some folks like to take pictures with expensive vehicles, post them online, pretend they're something they're not. This is a serious business establishment. David felt something crack inside him. Not his composure, not yet, but something deeper. A decision was forming in his mind. He could end this right now. He could pull out his phone, call his attorney, and have this man's employment terminated within the hour. He had that power now. But something stopped him. He wanted to see how far this would go. He needed to understand exactly what kind of culture existed in his new business. "I understand this is a business," David replied quietly. "That's exactly why I'm here. Now, would it be possible to speak with your general manager?" The supervisor let out a short, harsh laugh that made several people turn their heads. David could feel the weight of their stares, the uncomfortable tension spreading through the showroom like ripples in water. This wasn't just between him and this one man anymore. This was becoming a spectacle. The general manager? The supervisor shook his head slowly, that same condescending smile fixed on his face. "Mr. Harrison is meeting with actual clients right now. High-value customers who are here to make real purchases. I can't just interrupt his day because someone wants to browse." David took a slow breath, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I'm not asking you to interrupt anything. I'm simply requesting to speak with management when convenient. I have some serious questions about the dealership." "Serious questions?" The supervisor repeated, his tone mocking now. "Let me guess. You want to know about our financing options? Payment plans? Listen, friend, I've been doing this job for 8 years. I can spot a serious buyer from a mile away, and I know when someone's wasting my time." The words stung, but not because they were true. They stung because David knew this had nothing to do with his questions or his interest level. It had everything to do with what this man saw when he looked at him. Just another black man who didn't belong in a luxury showroom. Someone to be managed, controlled, and ultimately removed. "I'm not your friend," David said quietly, his patience wearing thin, "and I've been respectful since the moment I walked in here. All I'm asking for is the same courtesy you've shown every other customer in this building." The supervisor's expression hardened. "You know what? I think it's time for you to leave. You've been asked nicely multiple times to either make a purchase or go somewhere more suitable. I don't appreciate your attitude, and I don't have time for this." David felt his heart pounding now. He glanced around the showroom and saw a dozen faces watching them. Some customers looked uncomfortable, whispering to each other. A few salespeople had stopped working entirely, frozen in place as they witnessed the confrontation. One young salesman looked like he wanted to say something but kept his mouth shut, fear visible in his eyes. "I haven't been asked nicely even once," David said, his voice carrying across the quiet showroom now. "I've been profiled, dismissed, and insulted from the moment you walked over here. And now you're asking me to leave simply because I don't look like your typical customer. That's not what this is about." The supervisor snapped back, but his face had gone red. "This is about respecting our business and our time. You're causing a scene, making other customers uncomfortable. If you don't leave voluntarily, I will call security and have you removed. Is that what you want?" David looked at him for a long moment. Part of him wanted to reveal everything right there. Pull out his phone, show him the signed acquisition papers, watch the color drain from his face as he realized he'd just insulted and threatened his new boss. The image was almost satisfying enough to make him do it. But another part of him, the part that had built a successful business by being strategic and thoughtful, told him to wait. This wasn't just about one supervisor's bad behavior. This was about understanding what kind of culture existed here, how deep the problem ran. If he revealed himself now, everyone would fall into line, apologize profusely, and he'd never know the truth about his new business. "Fine," David said simply. "Call security if that's what you feel you need to do." The supervisor looked almost surprised that David hadn't backed down or stormed out. He pulled his phone from his pocket with an aggressive motion, making sure David and everyone else could see exactly what he was doing. He pressed a number and held the phone to his ear. "Yeah, it's Derek on the main floor. I need security to the showroom immediately. We have a situation with someone refusing to leave the premises." He paused, listening. "No, he hasn't done anything violent, but he's been asked to leave multiple times and is now disrupting business. Just get someone here now." David stood perfectly still, his hands visible at his sides, his posture relaxed. He'd learned a long time ago that in situations like this, any sudden movement could be misinterpreted. He wasn't going to give this man or anyone else an excuse to escalate things further. It took less than 3 minutes for security to arrive. An older man in a gray uniform walked quickly through the showroom entrance, his radio crackling at his hip. He looked to be in his 60s with kind eyes and a weathered face that suggested he'd seen a lot in his years. His name tag read Frank. "What's going on here?" Frank asked, his voice calm and professional as he approached. Derek jumped in immediately. "This individual has been asked repeatedly to leave the premises. He's trespassing and causing a disturbance. I need him escorted out immediately." Frank looked at David, really looked at him, and something passed between them. A moment of understanding, maybe even sympathy. "Sir," Frank said gently, addressing David, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." David nodded slowly. "I understand. I'll leave peacefully." "I appreciate that," Frank said quietly, and there was genuine respect in his voice. As they walked toward the exit, Frank leaned in slightly, keeping his voice low so only David could hear. "I'm sorry about this, sir. Really sorry. That guy Derek, he's been a problem for a while now. A lot of us on staff have noticed it, but nobody says anything because he brings in good numbers." David glanced at the older man, seeing the genuine regret in his eyes. "It's not your fault," he said. "You're just doing your job." "Still doesn't make it right," Frank replied as they reached the doors. "Look, if you're seriously interested in buying a car, I can give you a card for another dealership across town. Good people there, they'll treat you right." David felt a wave of appreciation for this man's kindness in the middle of such a humiliating experience. "Thank you, Frank, I really appreciate that." As David stepped out into the parking lot, the automatic doors closing behind him, he pulled out his phone. He had several calls to make, and the weekend was about to get very busy. David sat in his rental car for a few minutes, just breathing. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he processed what had just happened. He'd faced discrimination before, plenty of times throughout his life and career, but it never got easier. Each time felt like a fresh wound, a reminder that no matter how successful he became, some people would always see him as less than. But this time was different. This time he had the power to do something about it. He pulled out his phone and dialed his attorney first. Robert picked up on the second ring, his familiar voice bringing some comfort. "David, how's the new acquisition looking?" "We have a problem," David said, and then he told him everything. Every detail of the encounter, every word Derek had said, the way he'd been treated from the moment he walked in. Robert listened without interrupting, and when David finished, there was a long silence on the other end. "I'm sorry that happened to you," Robert said finally, his voice heavy. "But legally, you're in a strong position here. You own the business now. Even if the announcement isn't until Monday, you have every right to terminate the supervisor immediately if you want." "I know," David replied, "but I need to understand if this is just one bad employee or if the problem runs deeper. Can you get me access to any complaint records? Customer feedback? Anything that might show a pattern?" "I'll make some calls," Robert promised. "Give me a few hours." Next, David called Patricia, the HR director he'd hired specifically for this acquisition. She'd come highly recommended, with 20 years of experience in corporate culture transformation. When he explained what happened, she went silent for a moment before responding. "David, I'm horrified," she said, "but I'm not entirely surprised. During my preliminary interviews with staff, I picked up on some concerning attitudes. Nothing this blatant, but there were red flags. I was planning to address it after the transition, but clearly we need to act faster." "I want a full investigation," David said. "Not just into this supervisor, but into the entire culture. Talk to current employees, former employees, if you can track them down. I need to know what we're really dealing with here." "Consider it done," Patricia replied. "I'll start making calls today." His final call was to Helen, the previous owner who was selling him the dealership. She was a pleasant woman in her 60s who'd built the business over 25 years. They'd gotten along well during negotiations, and she'd seemed genuinely excited to pass the torch to him. But now he wondered how much she really knew about what went on in her own business. "David," Helen answered cheerfully, "I wasn't expecting to hear from you until Monday." "Is everything all right?" He told her the story, keeping his voice even and factual. As he spoke, he could hear her reactions on the other end. Small gasps, whispered words of disbelief, and finally, what sounded like genuine shock. "Oh my God, David, I don't know what to say. I'm absolutely mortified." Helen's voice cracked slightly. "Derek has been with us for 8 years. He's always had excellent sales numbers, Never had any complaints filed against him that reached my desk. I had no idea he was treating people this way. That's exactly what concerns me, David said carefully. How many complaints never reached your desk? How many customers walked out and never came back because of treatment like this? Helen was quiet for a moment. You're right. I should have been more aware. I've been so focused on the numbers and the business side that maybe I missed what was happening on the floor. David, I'm so sorry. This isn't the business I thought I was passing on to you. Over the next 2 days, David worked from his hotel room, coordinating with his team as they dug into the dealership's history. What they found painted a troubling picture. Robert discovered several complaints buried in old files, customers who'd reported feeling unwelcome or dismissed based on their appearance. Most had been noted but never seriously investigated. The pattern was there if you knew where to look. Patricia conducted phone interviews with 12 former employees. 3 of them had stories that made David's blood run cold. A young Hispanic salesman who'd been pushed out after complaining about Derek's comments. A black woman in the service department who'd left after repeatedly being passed over for promotions, despite excellent performance reviews. An older Asian employee who'd witnessed Derek make crude jokes about customers' accents. They were all afraid to speak up while they were there, Patricia explained during their evening call. The culture was clear. Derek brought in money, so management looked the other way. Anyone who complained was seen as a troublemaker. David also had his team pull security footage from the past month. Watching hours of recordings, they found more examples. Derek approaching well-dressed white customers immediately while ignoring others. His body language changing completely depending on who walked through the door. Other staff members following his lead, learning from his example that some customers mattered more than others. By Sunday evening, David had a complete picture. This wasn't just one bad supervisor. Derek had created a culture of discrimination that spread through the entire sales floor. Young salespeople had learned that this behavior was not only acceptable, but rewarded. Good employees had either left or learned to keep quiet, and management had been so focused on sales numbers that they'd ignored the human cost. David sat in his hotel room that night, reviewing all the evidence one more time. He thought about Frank, the security guard who'd shown him kindness. He thought about the young salesman he'd seen who looked like he wanted to speak up but didn't dare. He thought about all the customers over the years who'd walked into that showroom excited about buying a car, only to leave feeling small and unwanted. Tomorrow was Monday. Tomorrow he would walk into that dealership as the owner. Derek had no idea what was coming. Neither did most of the staff. But by the end of the day, things were going to change. David closed his laptop and looked out the hotel window at the city lights. He'd worked his entire life to reach this position of power and influence. Now he had a chance to use it for something that really mattered. Not just profit margins and sales targets, but creating a place where everyone, regardless of what they looked like or how they dressed, would be treated with dignity and respect. He set his alarm for 6 a.m. He had a big day ahead of him, and he wanted to be ready. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and a crispness in the air that made everything feel sharper, more alive. David woke at 5:30 earlier than his alarm. He couldn't sleep anymore, his mind already running through everything that was about to happen. He showered, shaved carefully, and put on his best suit. A charcoal gray 3-piece with a deep blue tie. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He looked at himself in the hotel mirror and barely recognized the man staring back compared to the casually dressed person who'd been kicked out just days before. The drive to the dealership took 20 minutes. David arrived at 7:45, 15 minutes before the staff meeting was scheduled to begin. Helen was already there, waiting in the lobby with a warm but nervous smile. She looked like she hadn't slept well either. "David," she said, reaching out to shake his hand. "I'm glad you're here early. I wanted to apologize again before everything starts. What happened to you, what my employees did, it's inexcusable." "I appreciate that, Helen," David replied genuinely. "But today isn't about apologies. It's about making sure it never happens again." They walked together toward the main conference room. Staff members were already gathering, coffee cups in hand, chatting casually about their weekends. David noticed Derek immediately. He stood near the back of the room, laughing loudly at something another supervisor was saying. His suit was perfectly pressed, his confidence unshakable. He had no idea his world was about to come crashing down. As David entered the room, a few people glanced his way curiously, but most didn't pay much attention. Why would they? To them, he was just another businessman in a suit, probably a consultant or corporate visitor. Derek looked right past him without a flicker of recognition. The man who'd been so concerned about David's presence on Friday didn't even register him now that he was dressed differently. The room filled quickly. Sales staff, service managers, finance people, and administrative workers. About 40 people in total. Frank, the security guard, stood near the door and gave David a small nod of recognition. There was surprise in his eyes, seeing David here in professional attire, but also something else. Understanding, maybe. A sense that something important was about to happen. At 8 o'clock sharp, Helen called the meeting to order. The room quieted down, people finding seats or leaning against walls. Helen stood at the front, her hands clasped together, and David could see she was emotional. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I know you're all wondering why we called this Monday morning meeting. Well, today marks a significant change for Prestige Auto Gallery. After 25 years of building this business, the time has come for me to step aside and pass it on to someone new." A murmur went through the crowd. Some people looked shocked, others nodded as if they'd suspected this was coming. Helen continued, her eyes getting a bit misty. "This dealership has been my life's work. I've watched many of you grow here, start families, build careers. I'm incredibly proud of what we've accomplished together. But every story has its chapters, and this is the end of mine. I'm excited to introduce you to the person who will write the next chapter." She turned and gestured to David, who stepped forward to stand beside her. "Everyone, please welcome David Chen, entrepreneur, investor, and as of last Friday, the new owner of Prestige Auto Gallery." The room erupted in polite applause. David scanned the faces in front of him, watching reactions. Most people were clapping and smiling, curious but welcoming. A few looked uncertain, worried about what new ownership might mean for their jobs. And then there was Derek. David watched the exact moment recognition hit. Derek's hands had been coming together in a lazy clap when he suddenly froze. His eyes went wide, his mouth falling open slightly. The color drained from his face so quickly he looked like he might faint. His hands dropped to his sides as he stared at David in absolute horror. David let the applause die down naturally before he spoke. He didn't smile. He didn't try to charm the room. He just stood there and let the weight of the moment settle on everyone. "Thank you, Helen," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the conference room. "I am excited about this opportunity. I've spent months researching this business, studying the market, looking at your numbers. On paper, everything looked excellent. Your sales figures, your customer retention rates, your reputation in the community. Everything suggested this was a well-run, successful operation." He paused, letting that sink in. People were nodding, looking pleased with themselves. But then I came here in person for the first time. Last Friday afternoon. And what I experienced was one of the most degrading, humiliating encounters of my professional life. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. People exchanged confused glances, trying to understand what he meant. Derek had gone even paler, if that was possible, and he was gripping the edge of the table in front of him. David began to recount the story in detail. Walking through the showroom, being ignored by staff, the way Derek approached him with suspicion and hostility. Every insulting comment, every assumption, every moment of that encounter. As he spoke, he watched the reactions ripple through the crowd. Some people looked genuinely shocked, their hands covering their mouths. Others looked down at their feet, uncomfortable but not surprised. A few of the younger salespeople glanced at Derek with expressions that suggested they'd witnessed similar behavior before. Frank, still standing by the door, nodded slowly, his face sad but understanding. "Derek Patterson," David said, finally looking directly at the man who'd kicked him out. "You judged me entirely on how I looked. My skin color, my casual clothes. You decided within seconds that I didn't belong in this building, that I couldn't possibly afford to be a customer here. You treated me like a problem to be solved, a nuisance to be removed." Derek tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He looked like he wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor. "And here's what troubles me most," David continued, his voice getting stronger. "My investigation over the weekend revealed that I wasn't the first person you treated this way. Not even close. There's a pattern here. Documented complaints that were ignored. Former employees with stories that should have been taken seriously years ago." He pulled out a folder from his briefcase and held it up. This contains security footage, interview transcripts, complaint records, and testimonies from people who were brave enough to speak up. Derek, your employment with this company is terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. The room exploded with whispered conversations. Some people looked relieved, others shocked. Derek finally found his voice, stammering out words. Wait, please, I can explain. I didn't know who you were. If I had known... That's exactly the point, David cut him off, his voice sharp now. You didn't know who I was, so you felt comfortable treating me that way. But Derek, this isn't really about me. It's about every single person who walked through those doors and was judged, dismissed, or insulted because they didn't look like your idea of a worthy customer. Frank walked over quietly, professionally, placing a gentle hand on Derek's shoulder. Come on, he said softly. Let's go. As Derek was escorted out in stunned silence, David turned back to face the remaining staff. The real work was just beginning. The conference room remained silent after Derek left, the weight of what had just happened settling over everyone like a heavy blanket. David could see different emotions playing across different faces, fear in some, relief in others, and in a few, what looked like guilt. He let the silence stretch for another moment before continuing. I want to be very clear about something. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about me feeling insulted and wanting to punish someone. This is about the kind of business I'm going to run, and more importantly, the kind of business you're going to be part of. A young salesman near the front raised his hand tentatively. David nodded at him. Yes? Sir, I just want to say some of us noticed Derek's behavior. We didn't like it, but he was a top performer, and management never seemed to care. So we thought... He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. You thought it was acceptable because it was profitable? David finished for him. The young man nodded, looking down. That ends today. I don't care if someone sells 100 cars a month. If they're doing it while making other human beings feel unwelcome or lesser than, they don't belong here. David walked to the center of the room, making sure he could see everyone. Over the next few weeks, every single person in this building will go through comprehensive training. Not just a quick seminar you sit through while checking your phone. Real, meaningful training on unconscious bias, inclusive customer service, and treating every person who walks through that door with dignity and respect. He saw a few eye rolls, some crossed arms. Change was never easy, and some people clearly weren't thrilled about it. That was fine. They'd either adapt or find work elsewhere. We're also restructuring how commissions work, David continued. Starting next month, part of your performance review will include customer feedback scores. And we're implementing a new system where any customer can report their experience directly to me or HR, completely anonymously if they choose. An older salesman spoke up, his voice skeptical. With all due respect, Mr. Chen, this is a business. We have sales targets to meet. If we spend all our time worrying about feelings and feedback forms, how are we supposed to hit our numbers? David looked at him steadily. Let me ask you something. How many potential customers do you think we've lost over the years because they walked in, felt unwelcome, and walked right back out? How many people told their friends and family to avoid this place because of how they were treated? The salesman opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, thinking. Good customer service isn't separate from good business. David continued. It is good business. When people feel respected and valued, they buy from you. They come back. They tell others, we're not sacrificing profits for principles. We're building a better business model that happens to also be the right thing to do. Patricia, his HR director, stepped forward then. She'd been standing quietly to the side, taking notes. I'll be setting up individual meetings with each of you over the next week, she said. This is a chance to talk openly about the culture here, share concerns, and be part of creating something better. No one will be punished for honest feedback. David noticed Frank still standing by the door and made a decision. Frank, can you come up here, please? The security guard looked surprised but walked to the front of the room. Up close, David could see he was nervous, uncertain why he'd been called out. This man showed me kindness on one of the worst days I've had in years, David said, looking at Frank with genuine appreciation. When he was asked to escort me out, he treated me with respect. He apologized for the situation, even though it wasn't his fault. He even offered to help me find another dealership where I'd be treated better. Frank looked uncomfortable with the attention, but David continued. That's the kind of character I want in leadership positions here. Frank, I'm offering you a position in our new customer relations department. We're creating a team specifically focused on ensuring every customer has a positive experience. You interested? Frank's eyes went wide. Sir, I'm just security. I don't have experience in customer relations or sales or anything like that. You have something more important, David replied. You have empathy. You have integrity. The rest we can teach. What do you say? A slow smile spread across Frank's face. I'd be honored, sir. Thank you. The room broke into genuine applause this time. David could see the mood shifting slightly, people starting to understand that this wasn't just about punishment and rules. It was about opportunity and change. Over the following months, the transformation of Prestige Auto Gallery was remarkable. It wasn't easy. 3 more employees left, unwilling or unable to adapt to the new culture. But most stayed and slowly began to change. The training sessions were intense and sometimes uncomfortable, forcing people to examine their own biases and assumptions. David made it a point to spend time on the showroom floor regularly. Sometimes in a suit, sometimes in casual clothes. He watched interactions, listened to conversations, and made himself available to both staff and customers. He wanted everyone to know that the owner wasn't some distant figure in an office, but someone who cared about every detail of the business. The community outreach program Patricia developed brought in new customers from neighborhoods that had never felt welcome before. Sales didn't drop like the skeptics had predicted. They actually increased. Word spread about the dealership's new approach, and people who'd avoided them for years started coming back. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after that Monday morning meeting, David was walking through the showroom when he saw something that made him stop. A young black woman had just entered, looking around nervously. She was dressed simply, clutching her purse like a shield. He recognized that look, that body language. She was expecting to be judged. But before David could approach her, he saw Jennifer, one of the salespeople who'd been at the company for years. She walked up to the young woman with a warm, genuine smile. Good morning. Welcome to Prestige Auto Gallery. Is this your first time visiting us? The young woman nodded, still guarded. Yeah, I'm looking for my first car. I'm not sure if I can afford anything here, but I thought I'd look. Jennifer's smile didn't falter for a second. That's wonderful. Buying your first car is so exciting. Let's sit down and talk about what you're looking for and what your budget is. We have a wide range of options, and I'm confident we can find something perfect for you. Can I get you some coffee or water while we chat? David watched as the young woman's shoulders relaxed, her grip on her purse loosening. The fear in her eyes was replaced with hope and excitement. Jennifer led her to a comfortable seating area, pulling out brochures and asking questions with genuine interest. That was the moment David knew the culture had truly changed. Not because of rules or policies or training sessions, though all of those helped, but because people had started to understand that every customer who walked through that door was a human being deserving of respect, regardless of what they looked like or how they dressed or how much money they had. David returned to his office with a smile on his face. There was still work to do, always would be. Culture wasn't something you fixed once and forgot about. It required constant attention, reinforcement, and leadership. But standing there watching Jennifer treat that young woman with genuine kindness, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt proud. Not just of what he'd built in business, but of what he was building here. A place where everyone belonged. Where dignity wasn't reserved for those who looked a certain way or had a certain amount of money. Where every person who walked through the doors could feel valued and respected. That, David thought, was success worth having.